About a year and a half ago, my second oldest son, Luke, was going to turn 16, and his grandfather gave him some money for a new car, which I'm grateful for, because otherwise all my boys would ride bicycles, and we would get them these little electric engines as our kind of budget, And so I'm so grateful for their grandfather, and so he gave Luke some money, and he's like, Luke, here's your 16's coming up, a couple months, buy your car. And so Luke and I were looking for his new car, and it's so exciting, and, we're looking at all these things, and he wants the coolest, raddest, far too expensive than his budget. And so we're having that conversation. And at the exact same time, my oldest son, Sam, who his grandfather also bought him his truck, and Sam had modified the truck, jacked it up a little bit, all this kind of stuff. Sam at the exact same time was into classic cars, or he was getting into classic cars. And specifically, he was into Mustangs, 65 to kind of 69 Mustangs. And he was, thinking and researching and man, Dad, it'd be so cool to have that. And, one day, sell my truck, the whole thing. So all of that's happening. And Sam comes up with a great idea, and he goes to Luke and he says, Luke, what if you gave me the money that, Grandpa gave you, and I took that, you took my truck, and then I went and bought a classic. And so Luke begins to think about this, and Luke's like, man, I could never afford a truck like you have because you've modified it and all this stuff. And Luke's like, man, great deal. And so Luke decides to go with the trade. And now Sam is looking for a classic Mustang. And he's on Craigslist, and we're looking all around, and he finds a Mustang, a 67 Mustang in Houston, Texas. And it's blue, and it's beautiful. And so we go down, Sam and I go down to Houston, and we look at it. And I don't know anything about cars. what am I going to do on a classic car? Push on it, and if it comes back up, I'm like, I think it's good. I don't know. And so I'm pretty much there for moral support. And so we go down to Houston together, and we go to this, really fancy car place, and they've got all these jacks and these really cool cars, and there's this 67 Mustang. And we look at it, and they put it on the lift, and we're looking underneath, and we don't know what we're looking at, but we're like, just go, man, it looks cool, and, go on a test drive, and we're like, this is so amazing. And it was within his budget, and so we decided to buy it. And so we're driving it back from Houston, and I'm telling you, at every stoplight, at every gas station, because we were stopping, just checking on things, making sure everything. People were just going, oh, that's such a cool car. Hey, what year is that? And all kinds of people, we were just having these kind of, left field conversations. And I'm like, this is incredible. And in fact, I have a picture of us when we were actually driving it back. Here's the picture of Sam and the 67 Mustang right there. Isn't that gorgeous? Did somebody clap? That is so fun. Yeah. See, I told you. It's these cars. I don't know what. So we're driving it back, and Sam, look at his smile. He's like, this is awesome. What he's been dreaming about. And so we get it back to the house, and all of a sudden, I don't know anything. So we just go to the place you go to, YouTube. And we become somewhat familiar with how to fix, and we're working on all these things on the engine, on the interior, all this stuff for months and months. We're just spending all this time, after work, we go in the garage together, on the weekends, and it's awesome. But Sam's a teenager, and this car has a 6-cylinder engine, and he wants an 8-cylinder because he wants it to go faster. Well, Grandpa kind of comes back in the picture because Grandpa has a 69 Mustang that's been sitting in his garage that's been restored, and it's just collecting dust. He never drives it. And he gets word of all the things that are happening and that Sam wants a, bigger engine. And so one day he comes to Jill and I, and he's like, hey, I never thought I'd do this, but it just sits in the garage. What if I gave Sam my 69 with a bigger engine and he sold the 67? And we were like, if you want to, at your own risk. And so he decides, he's like, I want to do it. So he gives Sam this 69 yellow Mustang right there. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's 17, 18 years old. High probability of wrecks, But Sam is he is so excited. And he and I, we had worked on this 67 Blue Mustang for a while, and I've kind of liked it. I enjoyed working on it. And so I did something. I went to Jill and I said, babe, listen, I know we're supposed to sell the 67. But... what if I sold my car and got the 67? And so Jill thought about this. She gave me that look, just like you guys are kind of giving me, oh, I know what you're up to, And so I said, babe, what? And she was like, yeah, she's like, go for it. And so I was so excited. So I took my car, which is perhaps one of the most masculine, powerful. It's a car every like wild man wants. My 2014 Nissan Leaf, all electric. Yeah, and I bought that thing. I bought this because we had so many car issues, and I'm like, babe, we got to get something that just like less parts, like this doesn't break down. And so I was driving this for a couple years, and I said, what if we sold this? And so I sold a Nissan Leaf, and now we have 2 classic Mustangs. And here they are in our garage right there. Isn't that cool? I mean, they look like Matchbox cars. And so I'm just telling you, all of this is happening, and then, unfortunately COVID happens, but kind of, fortunate for us, we have these cars and YouTube, and so, we're just working on these cars all the time, in the evenings and on the weekends, and it's amazing, and connecting with my boys and help me do this, and I'm learning like about crankshafts and, all this stuff. I've just never known this stuff, and it's been awesome. So all this has taken place, and while all this is happening, Jill a couple months ago comes up to me, and she's like, babe, here's the deal. I love you working on the cars with the boys and spending all that time. But hey, there's something happening between us relationally. That, the more time you spend there, the less time you spend here. And babe, can I talk to you real quick about a little bit of time? Because time is so important to our relationship. And I want you to do what you're doing. But it's coming at the expense of our intimacy and our connection. And so apparently Jill loves, God loves Jill and listens to Jill far more than me, because, you guys are aware, just a few weeks ago, there was a massive hailstorm. And I happened to drive the 67 Mustang on that specific day. And I happened to drive it here. And for whatever reason around our church area, like the hailstones seemed like softball size. I don't know. They weren't that big, but they seemed that way. And the insurance company this week just totaled my car. And I watched it get towed away, the 67. And Jill and I are standing there with the boys, and we're watching it, and I was like pretty logical about the moment. I understand, this is how it all works. And in the moment, I was like just an emotional mess. I was like, this is crazy. And I felt that. So the moral of the story is, if you want things to happen in your life, ask Jill. She'll pray for you, and apparently God listens. I don't know. So here's the deal. The reason I share that with you, that's kind of a long story for, a fairly simple point. But the point is, Jill is expressing to me, she was just going, babe, in our relationship, listen, I want you to go do these things, and that's great for the boys, but gosh, our relationship, there's a tension. The quality of our relationship is diminishing. And that's important, because today we're in part 3 of this series called You've Got a Friend in Me, where we're talking about relationships. And we're talking about all of our relationships, marriage relationships, parenting relationships, dating relationships, every relationship in your life. And we're talking about how do we increase the quality of those relationships. And guys, throughout this series, we've made this simple statement, but it's so profound. We said the quality of your life is only as good as the quality of your relationships. And I would highly encourage you, really, for real, to do the research. Do the research on your own. This statement is backed up by objectivity. There's substance behind this statement. There's all kinds of objective research outside of, just take the religious, spectrum, if you will, for a second out. And if you just looked at what leads to quality of life, it's quality relationships. There's all kinds of research on this, that your happiness and contentment and joy and even your physical body is so impacted by the level and the quality of your relationships. And so throughout this whole series, what we're doing is we're just talking about these keys to unlock the depth and the significance and the quality of all of our relationships. And so in week 1, when we launched this whole series, the first key we talked about is we said, just be curious. In your relationships, be curious. And we talked about what that means and to believe the best. And that's difficult to do, but I'm telling you, it provides trust in those relationships. Talked all about that. Last week, we talked about to be self-aware, that one of the greatest gifts you can give any kind of relationship is the healthiest version of you. If you show up with the healthiest version of you, then I'm just telling you, it's a game changer in your relationships. It keeps all the stuff, the yuck that's, oftentimes in us from getting all of our relationships and making them far more complex. One of the greatest gifts we can give any relationship is the healthiest version of us. And one of the greatest things you can do to show up and be the healthiest version of you is to be self-aware, is to ask and answer the question that's going to require an enormous amount of humility. What's it like on the other side of me? When I show up in this marriage, what's it like on the other side of me this last week, this last month? What's it like on the other side of me as a friend? What's it like on the other side of me as a father, as a mother? Boy, that's a question that's hard to ask, but I'm telling you, it's a giant step towards self-awareness, which is a giant step towards health, which begins to unlock the quality of that relationship. And those were the first two keys. And if you guys weren't here over the last couple of weeks, I really want to encourage you to go online. You can watch, you can listen, and engage in what we said, because there's a whole lot more context to that. Now today, I want us to discover our third key. And what Jill was feeling with the Mustangs and all that stuff is really going to be the context for our third key. And I want you to think about this statement that I'm about to show you. And this statement is something that's intuitive. You know what we're about to talk about. But it's something that we need to be reminded of because we lose sight of it. And what we all know is this, is that the quality relationships require quality time. You cannot get around this, that if you want a quality relationship, if you want that, connectedness, that consistency, that vulnerability, you see me, you love me unconditionally, man, I feel safe, there's a sense of security in this relationship, whatever kind of relationship that is, that's going to require every single time quality time. In fact, the research is just astounding on this, and I don't have time to be exhaustive on this, but I'll show you a couple things that perhaps you don't know. Look at this. Did you guys know that it takes 50 hours of relational time to go from an acquaintance to a friend? In other words, if you meet somebody and you're like, hey, that's cool, I kind of like you, maybe the chemistry's there, and I want, to be your friend, or maybe, just develop this relationship, that's going to take 50 hours. 50 hours to start to go, hey, I'm trusting you, 50 hours to develop that kind of intimacy. And then from there, in terms of time, that's a lot of quality time. But from there, the research goes on to say this. Did you guys know it takes 200 hours of relational time to go from a friend to a best friend? If you want somebody who you can confide in, somebody that you can deeply trust, somebody that you can go, here's my life, and they can still love you because they love you unconditionally, that's part of a definition of a best friend, that's going to take an enormous amount of time. And guys, that's just friendships. But then if we move to another relationship, parenting relationships, gosh, our kiddos need an enormous amount of time. And that's difficult because in our culture today, in parenting, what we've kind of shifted to, and this is a general statement, but what we've shifted to is with our kids is to go, if we can just give them experiences, if they can just play t-ball or soccer and, football and flag football and all those things are fine. But if we can just give them those experiences and a vacation, that's my job as a parent, as a father, as a mother. But that's not our job. That just may be part of it. Our job is not to be experientially rich. Our job with our kids are to be relationally rich. They need us to discover their hearts. They need us to care, to show up. They need us to fight for the relationship. They need us to discover how in the world do we get to, around that question, or mom, you're this, or dad, you're this, and oh man, I'm not going to give up on you. Man, they need that relational richness. And that is going to require time. And that's why one of the things perhaps you've heard maybe in a children's study book or psychologists would say, children spell love T-I-M-E. Mom, Dad, I appreciate the experiences. Those are all part of it. But the thing that is so much greater than that, you got to spend time with me. You got to be intentional with me. And don't give up. And that's just with our kids. And then when you go to marriages, what Jill is alluding to, she was talking about, is this dynamic here that in marriages, time is interwoven with intimacy. And that's true for pretty much any relationship. But guys, again, there's so much research. There are books and blogs written about this stuff. That intimacy, hey, I'm seen. Intimacy is I'm safe. Intimacy is I'm secure. Intimacy is, man, you see all of me and you celebrate the good times and you don't trump my celebrations. And when I share hard times, you don't trump it with something hard going on in your life. You just meet me in an empathetic way. Man, that is intimacy. That I am seen, that I'm heard, that I matter, that you discover me. Well, that is going to require time. But the enemy of intimacy and pretty much any relationship that we all face is busyness. In fact, isn't it true that our culture kind of baits us to the edge of busyness? That every day when you wake up, you're baited and baited and baited and said, come on, prioritize something over here. And do you know what I call that? Just gives you a little insight into my mind, which may not be a good thing. I call that a Pac-Man time sucker. And it's like Pac-Man, if you guys remember Miss Pac-Man and Pac-Man, it's just like eating our time and eating our time and eating our time and eating our time. And there are so many things that are just these time suckers in our life. I mean, think about this. There's things like email. You wake up in the morning and one of the first things you do is, here's my email, and oh my gosh, this is going on at the office, or here's what's happening, or the news, or whatever it is. And now here's your emotional energy, here's your mental energy. And now all of a sudden, it is just being sucked away. Or perhaps, social media. Social media is out there and it's constantly just bombarding you. Hey, look at me, look at me, look at me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. And guys, I'm so guilty of this. In fact, my boys have TikTok. You guys aware of TikTok? I would guess it's pretty popular. It's like, you're like, no, never heard of it. Anyways, TikTok. And so, Jill and I downloaded TikTok. We're on it because, Sam's posting all his Mustang pictures and all this kind of stuff. And this is how we secretly spy on our kids. And so, we're on TikTok. And the other day, I'm on TikTok and I'm looking at it. I'm looking at Sam's Mustang. And then the next picture is this dude water skiing and doing a double backflip. And the next picture is this, guy on a skateboard and he face plants. And I'm like, oh, that's terrible. And then the next thing is, some guy in his backyard taking this like cardboard thing with cement and like creating this thing around this flower bed. And I'm like, that is impressive. And like 30 minutes later, I'm sitting there going, I've been on this for 30 minutes. It just totally sucked my time away. That's social media. Again, I'm not knocking these things. I'm just saying we need to be aware of those things. And not only in social media, but work. If you misprioritize work, if you don't understand work for what it is and you over-identify with work, it is so tangible. You give an hour there, you get a benefit. You give an hour with your son or daughter, you're like, I don't know if that mattered. I don't know if it mattered with my wife. It's less tangible. So if you don't get clarity on work and over-identifying, oh my gosh, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm all this power and all this kind of stuff. With work, work's important. But man, that can suck your time away and you can prioritize it incorrectly. And then, of course, games. Games are one of those things that we think, hey, that's just for the little kids. Little kids just play games. But did you guys know the latest research in terms of gaming? Did you guys know this? This is kind of the hot off the press. Distribution of video gamers in the United States as far as 2020. 21% under 18, 38% 18 to 34, 26% 34 to 54. The majority of people playing video games, 25 to 40. That's who's playing the video games. And guys, again, I'm not knocking any of this because I'm guilty as well. I have Clash Royale on my iPad. And I don't know if you guys have played that, but that thing is so addictive. You talk to my boys, they're like, oh yeah, Dad likes Clash Royale. Now, sometimes we'll network and connect, but I'm with you. This is just a temptation. This is something that distracts us. And I could go on and on, but I think we all get this. There's sports, there's hobbies, there's TV. And my point, and hear me carefully, I'm not knocking any of these things. These things are fine. They're all good. What I'm saying is if you're not careful, if you're not intentional with your time, there's these Pac-Man time suckers that are baiting you every single day of your life. Prioritize me. Pay attention to me. Spend time with me. And when we do that, it comes oftentimes at the expense of our relationships. And the reason why is because intuitively we know this, but we need to be reminded of the fact that quality relationships require quality time. And if we're willing to be intentional, if we're willing to begin to understand time perhaps in a different way, think about time differently, it'll allow us to allocate and prioritize the most important things that lead to the quality life we desire, because quality of life is only as good as the quality of your relationships. Now, guys, there's so many examples of this, but today I just want to show you one to take this conversation even further. And I want us to kind of get some insight into time. And to do that, I want us to hear from a man who lived 1,500 years before Jesus, and his name is Moses. Moses. Now, Moses, you may be familiar with because you watched the Charlton Heston movie, what 10 Commandments called, Let My People Go, Pharaoh. Maybe you saw that with the cool beard, the cool hair, like his hair. Maybe you saw that. Maybe that's how you're familiar with Moses. But the kind of the long and short of it with Moses, Moses was the guy who led the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, out of captivity from the Egyptians. And then Moses led them across, the Red Sea and lifted his staff. And just an amazing thing. And then they wander in the wilderness for like 40 years, they just do a bunch of circles, trying to get to the promised land. And then they get right to the edge of the promised land, the Jordan River. After 40 years, Moses has been leading. Moses is an old man, and then Moses dies. I mean, that's not the greatest story, but, he dies right before the promised land. He never makes it into the promised land. But one of the things Moses did see is relationships. As an old man, he saw lots of relationships and how time is such an important thing to understand, especially when it comes to relationships. So Moses gives us some really cool insight in time. In fact, in Psalm chapter 90, he writes this as an old man and says, hey, for all of you, here's how you should view time. Here's how you should think about time. And it's so helpful in our conversation today, and it's going to give us our third key. So here's what he says. When it comes to time, Moses says, Lord, you have always been our eternal home, our hiding place from generation to generation. Long before you gave birth to the earth and before the mountains were born, you have been from everlasting to everlasting, the one and only true God. And I love the way that Moses starts this whole thing. He says to you, to me, he says, hey, in life, it's important to lay your foundation with God. I mean, you can try to pursue all the things in this world, but ultimately, where you're going to find meaning and purpose and significance in your identity is in everlasting to everlasting. Everything else, honestly, is just noise. You don't have enough time to truly find purpose and meaning and significance in this life, but God does, because God is in time and God is out of time and God transcends time. And He's the one to give you purpose, meaning, significance. He is your rock. He is your refuge. He is our foundation. Start with that, Moses says. And then he says, now let's begin to think about our time. And here's what he says about time. Look at this. He says, when you speak the words, life returned to me, man turns back to dust. And his point is when God says, hey, your time is up, it doesn't matter how successful you are. It doesn't matter your title. It doesn't matter all your accomplishments in this world. It doesn't matter how big your house is, how big your bank account or your retirement account is. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we all have the same fate. You cannot escape it. You got 70, 80, 90, 100 years at best. And all of us, his point is, will return to the dust. Now, this is going to date me a little bit, but when I read that this week, I couldn't help but think of the band Queen. You guys remember Queen? And their 1980s hit. You remember this one? Another one bites the dust, and another one, and another. Did I get that right? Yeah? Okay. I just sang alone. That's good. Anyways, but if you look at the meaning of the song, it's quite morbid. I mean, the whole point of the song is, hey, another one bites the dust, another one dies, another one dies, another one dies, another one dies. It's not a great message. But the point is, it's a reality, and we all know it. And Moses says, man, you got to embrace this, because if you think you have unlimited time, if you wake up and you don't keep this in perspective, you wake up going, I got unlimited time. Hey, I got plenty of time. If that's your perspective, you're going to waste your time. Your time is limited. Your life is limited regardless of how talented or successful you are. And then he kind of reiterates it and he continues. He says, for you, 1,000 years are as a passing day, as brief as a few night hours. This is God's perspective on our life. It's like 1,000 years to a day of your life. Like your life is just a flash. It's like, just 4 hours in the night. I mean, our life is so finite. Our life is so incredibly fast. And Moses is trying to bring us to the point to think about time in this way, to say time, it's limited. It's your most limited asset. So use it wisely. Use your time wisely. And Moses is teaching us, and hopefully you take this away, and this is important to think about. In terms of meaning and purpose and significance in this life, we don't have enough time to actually discover what that is. We just don't. And we get this because time is a prerequisite for a greater understanding of things. And we all get that intuitively. I mean, when you were 5, you thought the world's, one way. But then you were 15, and you're like, okay, now I see the world a little bit different. And then you're 25, and you go, I see the world different. And then you're 50, and then you're 75, and all of a sudden you get a broader and broader and broader and bigger perspective on what's important and not important, and what should I pursue, and what's meaning, and what's purpose. Well, you probably need 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years to truly discover in this world, in this universe, what is meaning, what's real, what's truth, what's important. Moses says, or you can just go to everlasting, who's in time and transcends time. And you don't have enough time to discover that. Your time is limited. You got 70, 80, 90, 100 years, and that's it. So use your time wisely. Build your foundation on your Heavenly Father. He gives you purpose and meaning. And so we go, okay, Moses, we've got that. What do we do with that? Practically, how do I apply this to my life? Well, Moses says, here you go. And I love this. This is a prayer. He says, God, teach us to number our days. God, every single day when I wake up, would you just teach me to number my days? And all of us know how to do this. I mean, if you're a student here and you have a big test coming up, and this is like a big pass-fail, and oh my gosh, I'm going to, graduate or not. I mean, and I came up to you and I said, hey, how many days until your test is coming up? You're going to go, oh, it's 23 days. You're going to know exactly because you've numbered your days. If you're in business and you got a big presentation, maybe with your CEO, and it's going to determine whether or not you're going to get the raise or the promotion or whatever, the title, whatever that is. And I came to you and I said, hey, whoa, how many days until that big presentation? You're going to know exactly. It's 8 days. 8 days from now, I present to the CEO. I know exactly what's going on. Or where I see it the most is when somebody's about to get married. And guys, I love weddings. This is one of my favorite things. In fact, last night I was, at a wedding, doing the whole ceremony and stuff, and it's just awesome. I love them. It's such an amazing moment, such a celebratory moment. And I love weddings. And here's the thing about a wedding, is if I go to the groom or, future groom, if I go to him and I'm like, hey, how many days until you're married? Typically I get, it's like a few months or, a couple weeks. They don't number their days very well. But if you go to the future bride, she knows her days exactly. She's like 73 days, 14 hours, and 13 seconds. And I'm like, you've numbered your days. My point is very simple. We all know how to live intentionally and number our days when there's something important ahead of us. Your life is ahead of you. Your relationships are ahead of you. And so when we're able to do this and live intentionally with our time, Moses says there's a gift you get. If you number your days, he says, so teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Did you know you'll get wisdom if you're intentional with your time? Wisdom is the ability to see what's true in life. Wisdom is the ability to connect the right dots in life. Wisdom just illuminates what's important. Or I could say it this way, that wisdom prioritizes the important in life. And guys, do you know when this happens for me, like my days are numbered and I see things so clearly and I feel like wisdom is so present? I wish it didn't work this way, but I think you can relate with this. It's for me personally, when this happens the most and I get such clarity on numbering my days in wisdom, is in tragedy. It's in tragedy. A few weeks ago, one of my mentors passed away unexpectedly. And this was a guy I've shared about, over the years with you guys. This is a guy I met with at 5:30 in the mornings at Denny's when I was, trying to discover what it looks like to follow Jesus, because I didn't know. And I was like, I don't know what it looks like to follow Jesus, but you do. So, hey, would you meet with me? He's like, yeah, 5:30 in the morning at Denny's. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But I did it. And he's an amazing man. He taught me so much. He was actually the guy who asked me, I was working at Dell, and he said, hey, have you ever thought about starting a church? And I'm like, no, I'm working at Dell, making good money. I mean, that's my career. He was that guy. Amazing man. Passed away unexpectedly a couple weeks ago. Jill and I are at the service, and I'm watching the video of Peter, and I'm seeing all of this, and I'm like, wow. It's in that moment, it's like all of life just kind of quiets down, and my days are numbered, and what's important becomes very clear. My role as a pastor, I've been in far too many rooms and far too many places with parents who've lost sons and daughters way too early. When I drive home, and I'm driving home to my boys and to Jill, it's in those tragedies, in those moments that it's like everything quiets. All the Pac-Man time sucker things, they go away. And I'm just focused, and my days are numbered, and I have such clarity on what's important. And every time when I'm very clear on numbering my days, what's important are relationships. That's it. There's nothing more important. Titles, money, retirement. Does she like me or not? Does he like me or not? It's relationships, every time. And if you're like, no, I'm just telling you, money's more important, success and fame. Again, just do the research. If you're intellectually honest with yourself, and you're just going, okay, all I want to do is just get to the bottom of this, you're not going to find any research that substantiates outside of a flare of happiness got a big bonus, got a flare of happiness, goes away. Got a big promotion, got the title in the office, goes away. The only thing that leads to lasting, sustained joy, satisfaction, happiness, contentment in life is the quality of your relationships. And when you prioritize those, it's a game changer. And so our third key to help us unlock the quality of relationships is to do what Moses said, to number your days. Number your days. So what does this look like practically? Well, I'll end with this. And I want to give you something practical that's been beneficial in my life. Hopefully it's going to be beneficial in your life to begin to number your days. I want to start with a quote by Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey is a leadership guru. He's a late leadership guru. He passed away, but he's written, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'd highly recommend that book as a leader. I mean, just great leadership principles. And Stephen Covey said this quote that I think just kind of connects to what we're talking about today. He says, the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. The key for you and I is not to prioritize what's on your schedule. Your schedule will drive you bonkers, but to schedule your priorities. And guys, I've had this front and center. I've learned the hard way in my life what Stephen says. For years and years and years, beginning North Point, I worked and worked and worked and worked and worked all the time. And for years and years I did this, and then, several years ago I sat down with this incredible mentor of mine, smart individual, and she was talking to me, and she just said, Buck, you're talking about your schedule, you're talking about how important your boys and Jill is, your relationships, but you're working all the time. Your schedule is driving you. And then she said to me, Buck, listen, I've met with some incredibly famous people. I've met with some of the most successful people you can imagine, some of the most wealthy individuals you can imagine. And I'm just telling you, at the end of the day, the legacy of any man is not what he accomplished in his bank account and all that. The legacy of a man is how well he loved his wife and children, period. The legacy of a woman is how well she loved her husband and children, period. It's your relationships. That was a hard thing for me to hear, but it began to help me reprioritize what's important and begin to schedule my priorities versus taking my schedule and just letting it drive my whole life. And so, how do we do this? Well, I would suggest this. You've got to ask a couple questions. To begin to schedule your priorities, you got to sit down and go, what are my top priorities in life? And I know this is intuitive and simple, but do it. For real, do it. I want to challenge you to do this. Sit down, write it down, put it somewhere visible. Go, what are the most important things in my life? My relationship with my son, my relationship with my daughter, my relationship with my husband, wife, my relationship with my friends, my best friends, my relationship with my small group, my relationship with God. It's the most important. That's my top priorities. And write it down. And then I want you to ask a second question. And I want you to sit down with your wife, your husband, your son or daughter, or think about this and just ask, what makes you feel like a priority in my life? Hey, son, I'm trying to think about, what are the most important things in my life? And I'm just curious, you're one of the most important things. And so what do I do that makes you feel like a priority? Hey, sweetie, I know we haven't connected much because I've been out in the garage working on the Mustang. Hey, what does it look like to make you a priority? Because I really like doing that, but you're the most important thing. What does that look like? It's to sit down, ask the question, write it down. And then perhaps to ask a third question and say, what am I prioritizing instead of you? Hey, you know what it's like on the other side of me. You know what I aspirationally aspire to make you a priority. You know what I'm actually doing. What do I prioritize over you instead of you? Because I've asked my sons this question quite a bit. And do you know across the board what I hear over and over and over? I hear work. Dad, I feel like you prioritize work over me. And that is so hard to hear because then I want to justify it and be defensive and, oh my gosh, do you know how much things cost? And every day it's another $20 bill, it's like, come on. But that's important for me to know because then I can ask, well, what does that look like? I can teach them about work. I can speak wisdom into their life. And I can begin to understand actually what they're saying because they need relationship, not experience. These are 3 questions that if you're willing to ask, it's simple, but it's powerful. It allows you to reprioritize things. And then ultimately, once you ask and answer these questions, write them down. You got to decide to schedule your priorities, to do what Stephen Covey says. And if you're willing to do this, to schedule your priorities, do you know what this does? It's exactly what Moses talked about. It's our third relational key. It allows you to number your days. That's how you do it. That's how you take intentional steps to number your days. And it will give you a heart of wisdom. And when you number your days and you prioritize and you start to schedule your priorities, I'm telling you, it breathes life into your relationships. It breathes trust into your relationships. Before long, you begin to discover, man, I thought I'd never discover the heart of my son, the heart of my daughter. Because every time I ask them about their day, how's your day? Fine. How's your day? Fine. How's your day? Fine. Well, you're smart enough. You know how to get around that. I mean, you do it in business all the time. You figure it out. You know, all your ingenuity, all your intuitiveness, all your creativity, leverage that for your son or daughter. Well, if you're going to say, fine, how do I figure this out? And maybe this looks like taking them to breakfast. You know what? Hey, I'm going to take you to breakfast. And we're going to spend, an hour every single week. Or maybe it looks like when it comes to with God, to begin to schedule your time to go, hey, before I get on email, that's important. I'm going to take 5 minutes. Imagine if you just took 5 minutes a day. Just said, God, I'm going to invite you and I'm going to prioritize you because quality relationships require quality time. And God, what do you have to say to me today? Because every single day God has something for you. It's up to you whether or not you're going to discover that. He wants to grow the relationship. The question is, do you? Imagine the difference of quality that you could experience in your life if you do something that we all intuitively know, but we need to be reminded of. And reminded of the fact that at the end of the day, quality time leads to quality relationship. So we've got to prioritize it, and we've got to schedule it. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you again for today. Thank you that, you've preserved the message of Moses for thousands of years, which is so cool that the insights and the wisdom that you allowed Moses to speak into the scriptures are just as relevant today in our very, very busy lives. Father, I pray that just with a message like today, it's simple, but sometimes the simple is hard. And so, Father, would you give us the courage to do this, to be self-aware, to be courageous and ask these questions and write them down? Would you remind us of that? And then would you actually help us all take a step and prioritize the most important things in our life? Show us what that looks like. God, you're big enough to handle all that. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.